Great Lakes Prepping here. In today's video, we're making some delicious Italian sausage completely from scratch. For me, November and December is always sausage making season. I suppose that it probably started off that way because November's deer hunting season, and I end up with deer and venison, and I make sausage from a lot of that meat. But even if I don't make any venison sausage, I still end up doing a lot of sausage making. In the last video, we made some great maple breakfast sausage links, and in this video we're doing Italian sausage. And for this batch, these sausages will be all pork sausages, but these can be absolutely made with venison or really any other game meat. All you need to do is go 50% pork and 50% venison if you want to do venison sausages. That's the only variation to the recipe that you would need to do. Now, if I'm using venison, it's a very, very lean meat, and you need that fat in a good sausage. So I will go to the butcher and actually often buy trimmings, pork, meat, fat trimmings. The trimmings are a bit fattier than the meat we're using today, which is a pork butt or pork shoulder. There's not really much more to say about the venison aspect of this recipe or really any of these sausage recipes. All you have to do is go 50% venison, 50% pork. So there's a bunch of steps, of course. It's sausage making. There's going to be a lot of different steps. No single step is especially hard, but there's a few things you need to know and a couple of tricks. And a lot of it's just a little bit of practice and technique. So why don't I stop talking and let's get started with our cut of meat. Okay, as always, we're going to get started with our meat. This is a 10-pound pork shoulder, also called a pork butt for whatever reason. And the first thing we need to do is cut this thing up. Now we need to cut it into strips that are narrow enough that it'll fit into the meat grinder. And so I'm going to just go ahead and get this thing broken down into those strips, and we'll move on. Now I'll mention that there is a small bone in here that I have to be sort of careful of when I'm cutting into this. I don't want to chop into the bone and mess up my knife. So I'll just keep that in mind as I'm going here. I'll also mention that this thing was in the freezer until a couple of days ago, and it is just still barely frozen in certain spots. It's not so frozen that I can't cut through it, but it's actually going to grind a little easier when it's that cold. It's perfectly fine to use a pork shoulder that's completely thawed, but it actually helps just a little bit that it's very cold to the point of almost frozen. Okay, so we've got our pork butt cut up into strips, and now it's just time to grind them. Now, for these sausages, we're only putting them through the grinder once, and I'm going to be using the medium coarse grinding plate. Now, as I've mentioned before, I don't have a standalone meat grinder. I use this attachment for the KitchenAid, and it works pretty good for certain applications. If I need to put the meat through one time, it works quite well. If I need to put it through a second time when all that meat's already ground, it has a hard time kind of squishing down in there into the feed tube, and it just takes a long time. So I don't think I would use this particular grinder again if I had to double grind anything. I'll also mention, as I have before, that this thing came with a sausage stuffing attachment. And again, that thing worked very poorly because when you try to force the ground meat down this tube, it wants to sort of squish back out as you force it down, and it just takes a whole lot of time. And by the end of it, your arms are going to be just toast, especially after 10 pounds of meat like this. But for what we're doing today, this thing's going to work just fine. So let's get started. All right, we've got the meat cut up, we've got it ground, and now it's time to talk about seasonings. Now we're making a kind of a classic Italian sausage, so the seasonings are of course going to reflect that. And this is a recipe I've used many times and I'm very happy with it. So what we've got here is kosher salt, whole fennel seeds, ground black pepper, paprika, dried basil, red pepper flakes, garlic powder, white sugar, and onion powder. These are our dry seasonings, and we're going to mix them all together and then do our best to mix them and incorporate them into the ground meat. All right, we got our dry seasonings and we're going to mix it into the meat. I will say that what works really well and what a lot of people do is to have a great big tray, either plastic or stainless steel, something that might resemble like a wash tub or just a big food preparation tray. I don't happen to have one of those on hand right now, so I'm just going to do the best I can by sort of mixing them between these two big stock pots. And by the way, I'll also, of course, have the actual ingredients and proportions and quantities and all that stuff and a link in the description below the video. So I don't want to overwork this meat when I mix it. So I'm just going to do my best to kind of move a little over to this bigger pot, sprinkle some seasoning, add some more, and so forth. And of course, if I didn't make a huge mess in the process, it wouldn't be sausage making. As always, we'll practice very diligent food safety procedures between every step. I'm cleaning all the materials. I'm bleaching the countertop down. You know, we're working with a lot of raw pork here, and we don't want to screw around with foodborne illness or anything like that. Okay, we're going to just sort of give this a rough mix by hand. And then the last thing we need to add is some cold water. Now for 10 pounds, we're going to add 2 cups of water. This is just going to help kind of loosen this meat up a little bit and make it a little more pliable for when we stuff the sausage casings. Okay, and that's about good right there. We're ready to use this meat to stuff some sausage casings. So I'm going to get this kind of cleaned up, set up the sausage stuffing machine, and we're going for it. All right, let's take a look at what we need for stuffing some sausage. First, we obviously need the sausage stuffing machine. This is my Lem vertical cylinder sausage stuffer. And here we have the container that we put the meat in. And of course it will come out this tube here. So all I really have to do is fill this thing up. I have more meat than I have space in here. I'm probably gonna have to fill this up maybe 2 or 3 times. And then, of course, we have our casings. And I use natural casings for things like brats and Italian sausages and bigger types of sausage. I know some people are a little weirded out by using natural casings. They don't look real pretty when they're in their sort of unused form here. But I get these from my local butcher, and they're really inexpensive and they work great. I will mention that a lot of people buy their natural casings online, and they come sort of dried out and packed in salt and all sort of shriveled up, and you have to soak them in water and sort of reconstitute them. And then you have to really painstakingly wrap the end of each casing around your sink faucet and let the whole thing carefully fill up with water to kind of rinse all that salt out. And I don't like using them because of that, but also because they come in sort of random sporadic lengths of anywhere between 1 and 3 feet. And you really want to get a whole lot of one sort of contiguous piece of casing going. Otherwise, you're going to be having to stop and tie ends off and just blow a ton of time doing that. I really like the getting these casings from the butcher, and I won't have to do a lot of stopping and tying and all that kind of stuff, which really slows you down. So I'm going to get this thing filled up with some meat, and we're going to get going. It occurred to me that I forgot to talk about this tool. This is called a sausage pricker. This thing comes into play for 2 reasons. One, as I'm going, air bubbles sometimes form in the casing. And if you have an air bubble in a bad spot, it's not going to be able to go anywhere, and you have to release it. So poking a little teeny tiny hole in the casing with this takes care of that. Also, once the sausages are all made, you use one of these and kind of give it a couple of little pricks every once in a while, and that actually really does a lot to prevent the sausages from splitting while they're cooking, because the meat wants to swell and they need to go somewhere, and we want to prevent that. So picking a little bit of a tiny hole in the casing alleviates that, and the hole's so small that the meat doesn't really leak or ooze out of it, so it works pretty good. So what we want to do here is find the end of our casing, and we need to put it over the end of this tube here. And I like to spritz the tube with a little bit of spray oil. It helps it kind of go on a little easier. The only challenging part for me is finding the opening and carefully putting it over the end of the tube. Alright, well, we got a whole lot loaded on there. Turns out this wasn't all one constant piece, so we're going to get started with what we did have. That's a pretty good amount. We're going to get a lot of sausage out of that. It really does save a lot of time to try to get as much casing on here at a time as you can, because nothing slows me down more than having to stop and tie off these ends. They're slippery, they're tricky to tie, So now what we want to do is start cranking until a little bit of meat just starts to come out. We're going to force some air out of the line, so to speak. And we're going to just sort of start pushing some meat through. You see this thing's filling with air. Okay, just as some meat's starting to come out into the tube, we're going to tie this off. Doing our best to get rid of that air that's trapped in it. Alright, we got a little knot in there. And of course our sausage pricker, because I'm not an expert at this and I end up getting a little bit of air trapped at the end no matter what I do. So I'm just going to give it a little prick just to start. And what we want to do is keep a little bit of tension as we start cranking. We don't want to overstuff these because they'll split. They might not even wait until cooking to split. They might split when we start linking them. But we don't want them, mushy and sort of half filled either. It just takes a little practice to get the feel for how full you want these things. See, I can see I got kind of a big air bubble right here, and I didn't catch it until it was all the way down here, so I'm going to give it just the teeniest little prick. And then let that air escape somewhere. See, I'm getting a big air pocket right at the tube, which I definitely don't want. So I'm going to have to stop that before it starts to get out of hand. And I hate to do it when it's right here at the nozzle. Okay, you can see I'm here at the end of my casing, and I'm going to stop it just about here. I want a lot left over, so I have plenty of room to tie it off. And don't worry that these look kind of ugly. We're going to cut those off later. So there we have it. There's one big old Italian sausage. And kind of coil them up as we go just to save space, and then we'll link them all up at the end. That means twist them into individual links. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the rest of this. I think you got the idea. I'm not going to keep blowing through a bunch of video here because it's going to start to get redundant. So I'm going to get through the rest of my meat, and then we're going to pick the video up at the next step. So here we have it. 3 nice coils of Italian sausage. Now all that's left to do is twist them into links, and then I'm going to freeze most of them. What we want to do is spread one of these coils out the best we can. And we're going to twist them. But what you want to do figure out how long you want the thing. I'm going to say about, I don't know, about that long. And I'm going to just sort of pinch it a little bit to get some of the meat out of the way. And then I'm going to go, to the next one. I guess about like that. Do the same thing. Just gently pinch it to get the meat a little bit out of the way. And then I'm going to twist this middle link here about 3 times. Okay, and then move down. And then I'm going to go to the next 2. Give this a little pinch here. Move down, go to about here. Just carefully kind of squishing that meat out of where you want your pinch to be. And now I'm going to twist this one the other way. So I went this way with the first one, and I'm going to go backwards with this one. Doing it this way makes it so you don't have to try to twist this entire great big thing all in the same direction. Because if you start going opposite directions, you're just going to unwind the ones you started with. Well, I guess I'll make 3 slightly shorter ones down at the end here, rather than 2 great big enormous links. So I'll pinch them something about right here. Now as you go, you're going to get a little tighter, and that's why we don't stuff them super, super tight. Because once we start twisting them, we're going to take up some of that space. So I like to take my time with this part, because I have definitely split these before. And you don't waste the meat. You can still use the meat, make yourself a little ground sausage or something, but it kind of ruins the link. So there we go. Now the last thing I'll do with this, besides for trim this excess casing off with the scissors, is I'm going to give each one of these a poke with the sausage pricker. I'm going to try to give it a nice, just a nice shallow poke. Maybe I'll actually do 2 per link. Now, like I said earlier, what that's going to do is help any air pockets that might be trapped in there get out of there. But also, it's going to allow for it to expand a little more when cooking and not rupture the casing. It's not guaranteed, just like with any hot dog or sausage. Once in a while, you're going to split a casing. But this reduces the odds of that by a whole lot. Now, I could cut these links right now, but I've actually found that if I freeze them for a little while first, it works a little better. Once in a while, you cut it, and the little twist starts to unravel, and a little bit of meat starts oozing out. But if you wait till they're about half frozen, or even all the way frozen, and use a real sharp knife, you can sort of slice through that, and by the time you thaw them out to cook them, whenever that is, that end stays nice and sealed up. So I'm going to go ahead and link up the other 2 coils here, and then we're going to get these on some trays and put them in the freezer. So there we have it. 28 beautiful links of Italian sausage made completely from scratch. I actually kind of hit a personal record today by not splitting and ruining a single one of them. That's a personal best for me, so I'm going to stand here and be a little bit proud of that. But so like I mentioned, I'm going to put all 3 of these cookie sheets in the freezer and let them get about half, maybe even more than half frozen. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't save these little guys over here to cook up tonight for a little dinner and give it a proper taste test and sampling. So just to be thorough, I'll pick this video up then when we're going to separate the links and get them all vacuum sealed. And by the way, since I'm going to cook these up tonight anyway, I figured I'd mention my favorite way to cook Italian sausages is in the oven. I know people definitely cook them in a skillet or on a grill, of course, and those work well too. But I like to bake them. They get a nice even cook. I don't risk burning them or any of that stuff. All I do is put a little nonstick spray or a little olive oil in a baking dish like this, or even a cookie sheet if I have a bunch of them, and put them in the oven at 350 for it'll be about half an hour, give or take a couple minutes. And halfway through, I'll just turn them over the one time, and then at about that 27-28 minute mark, I'll check their temperature just to be sure, and they're just about good. Beautifully cooked, perfect Italian sausage links. It doesn't get much better than this. Mm. That's as good as any Italian sausage you'll get at any store. And there's just something so satisfying about having made that completely from scratch. So much bold, delicious flavor out of every bite of this. You know, I've said it before about other recipes. It's better to go a little overboard on the spice and the seasoning than using too little. That's not gonna be true with every dish, but with these sausages, it's definitely true. A little more seasoning isn't gonna bother anything, but if you go too light, you're gonna end up with a bland sausage. But that's it. That's my homemade Italian sausage from scratch. I hope you liked it. If you enjoyed the video, click the subscribe button and stay up to date on all our latest videos, including lots of cooking and food and even more sausage making videos. Thanks for watching and for all your support. And until next time, this is Great Lakes Prepping.